Hi, my name is Stacy Cortez, and I am doing a video on beta thalassemia for my genetics course. What is beta thalassemia first? Beta thalassemia is a blood disorder that is caused by a mutation in our genes. It inhibits the production of hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is a protein that is made up of two parts, the alpha part and the beta part. These two parts work together in our red blood cells in order to carry oxygen. But we see here that for beta thalassemia, the part that isn't properly functioning is the translation or the creation of the beta subunit for the hemoglobin. We see here the prevalence. The prevalence for beta thalassemia is actually pretty common in the world. However, comparatively, the US doesn't really have many cases of it. It is very frequent in the eastern region, closer to North Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. But we see a high increase in eastern Mediterranean countries, where there's about 2 to 18% of the population that's affected by this gene mutation. And because this gene mutation is what we call autosomal, so it's not linked to our sex chromosome, we see that it affects both men and women equally. And around 4.4 of every 10,000 births throughout the world present this disorder. The effects of this disorder, well, it depends on the kind of level, because beta thalassemia is on a spectrum. So depending on where you are on the spectrum depends your symptoms or how severe. But the main causes and symptoms of beta thalassemia is slow growth, because our blood cells aren't able to deliver proper oxygen to our tissues. So we end up not being able to grow or develop properly. We see iron overload, health problems, abnormal swelling, paleness, weakness, because our body isn't able to make enough energy for us. And then we see here the mode of inheritance. How do we get this? So beta thalassemia, like I said, is an autosomal recessive disorder. An autosomal recessive disorder is when you get one copy of this mutated gene from one of your parents and another copy from your other parent. So when you have these two copies that are mutated, your body isn't able to create the correct protein needed. So also we see that it's recessive. That means there is a gene that can mask it. And so many people who have the healthy gene and the mutated gene will not experience such severe symptoms sometimes because they still have the healthy one. However, just simply getting one of these copies of the mutated gene can still affect or cause mild symptoms in an individual. Here we see 4 different scenarios. Here I show that a person who has beta thalassemia has a genotype of TT, 2 little t's. And a person who doesn't have beta thalassemia at all and is a healthy individual has 2 capitalized t's. So in this first scenario, we see that these are 2 people who both have beta thalassemia. So when we do the Punnett square, we see that their offsprings actually have a 100% chance of obtaining the same disorder. In scenario 2, I show a healthy individual who has no copy of the mutated gene and a person who is affected by this disorder and has 2 little t's. So when they have children, the possibility of their children having beta thalassemia, the full-blown, is actually 0. Their children become what is known as carriers. So they carry the mutated gene, but because they have a healthy version of it, it masks many times the symptoms or even just doesn't affect them at all. When we see a person who's a carrier in scenario 3 with a person who has beta thalassemia, we actually see an increase in probability of their children coming out to having the disorder. So they can have a 50% chance of it or a 50% chance that their kid will end up being a carrier as well. In the final scenario, we see how two healthy individuals, both having capitalized T's, and the possibility of whether they can get this is 0%, because each passes on a healthy gene or copy to their offspring. So what causes more connected to this disease? Well, beta thalassemia is the gene specifically for that is a mutation in the HBB gene. This gene is the one that provides the instructions for our cells to be able to create these proteins and that are subunits to the hemoglobin, which is both a structure and helps carry iron in our red blood cells. So when this subunit of the beta globulin protein is affected, we see that the shape of the blood cell becomes more of a crescent, unable to hold either any or as much oxygen as our regular red blood cells. So because of this mutated gene, we can either see no production at all of the beta globulin or mild malformed forms of this beta globulin, which thus produces anemia and other forms. Here I show 3 different types of beta thalassemia in this spectrum that I was talking about. The first spectrum is beta thalassemia minor. So minor is also known as beta thalassemia trait, which occurs when there's one HBV gene that's mutated, but there's also a healthy one. So this is more for carriers. So people with this gene sometimes do present mild symptoms or sometimes none at all. Because of this, there's no real treatment for it because there can be the occasional maybe dizziness or weakness from the anemia. Their body doesn't really need many other forms of treatment because their body has still that other healthy gene that helps create normal subunits for hemoglobin. However, like I said before, because they're carriers, they do have a higher percent chance of passing on this trait than if a person who didn't have the mutated gene. The next one is beta thalassemia intermedia. So this is a condition where the individual actually inherits 2 mutated genes, one from their mother and one from their father. This condition is a bit more serious and we do see more symptoms. However, it is not the most serious of the spectrum. We see these forms of anemia, and for treatment, we actually see that individuals will get what are blood transfusions. So they get their blood taken out that either has these crescent-shaped red blood cells, and new red blood cells from donors are placed in their body to help continue have that oxygen through their body. There's simple exams that can also be done for everyone. When they check your blood, they check a number of it and how it looks. Individuals can actually be referred to by doctors to get checked when they see that maybe in these complete blood count exams, there's little bit of red blood cells or that they're oddly shaped. People with thalassemia intermedia also don't show symptoms very early on. We see that maybe as they're getting older and have the years have passed by, that's when they may start showing some symptoms that they would go to the doctor. But when they're born, they look perfectly healthy. The extreme of the spectrum is beta thalassemia major. And this one results when, again, 2 mutated genes, one from your mother, one from your father, come together. However, we see symptoms a lot faster. We see them up to the first 2 years of life, that the individual starts showing either maybe an enlargement of the liver, of the spleen, weakness, development can start slowing down, and we see how the anemia is a lot stronger. These people normally need regular blood transfusions and also additional therapy to help them not have iron overload from these blood transfusions. Then we see the inheritance pattern. So here is a pedigree. In this pedigree, we see that all the squares are males, the circles are females. And those that have a blue square in them, are represented as carriers of beta thalassemia. In this case, we'd say beta thalassemia major. We see how in the first bracket of Mijael and Areli, we see that Mijael has the two little t's like before, showing that he has beta thalassemia, and Areli, she has two capitalized t's, which means she has two completely healthy copies of the gene. However, when they have their children, their genes don't express the illness as major, beta thalassemia major, because it's masked by the healthy gene that they received from their mother. However, when Elysian marries Kevin, we see here that Kevin's affected with the beta thalassemia, and thus because Elysian is also a carrier, they have a higher probability of passing on this disorder to their offspring, which we see present in Alexander and Brandon. On the other side of the tree, we can see how, like Patrick and Erica, even though Patrick is a carrier, Erica is a healthy individual who has two healthy copies of the gene. So the possibility of their kids having beta thalassemia becomes 0%, because even though they might become carriers, their genes will never have the possibility of pairing with another recessive mutated gene. And that's how we see here in Serena, when she gets married to another healthy individual with no copies of beta thalassemia, now they start having offsprings without this gene. For this genetic disorder, we've seen that there have been genetic testing. Now here, genetic testing is a process where our DNA is examined, and you could find various things from our DNA, from either any mutation that may occur, from even phenotype, your hair color that can be, your eye colors. So through these tests, physicians can find out if a person actually has these genetic disorders. If they see any abnormalities in our test results, they can have these genetic tests done in order for us to see if it's inheritable, especially in couples who want to have children, and if they've seen inherited genes in their family, they can have these tests done on themselves. And there have even been prenatal exams that are coming up in order to test and see if a baby, while still in the womb, has the possibility of having these genes. One major option of a gene test is called the beta thalassemia test, the HBB test. It's a clinical test that's done. It diagnoses any mutation confirmation that physicians may have a suspicion of, and it helps examine only the gene HBB. That's where you can really, a doctor can narrow in, and if they already have a suspicion of it being beta thalassemia, they can check between the difference if it might be alpha thalassemia or beta thalassemia. This exam is usually done by the physicians, and you can most of the time also see that it correlates with other exams that they've done, such as low numbers of the red blood cells and abnormalities in its shape. The second genetic test is a bit more broad. So this hemoglobin evaluation reflex cascade is a test that goes specifically for the protein. It does different tests for 5 different conditions, which also includes alpha and beta thalassemia. However, it also tests for 3 different genes. So it tests for the HbA1, HbA2, and HbB. These tests can be done also on fetus, just to make sure if there isn't a possibility if the child will be born with or without this disorder. And it helps physicians understand better what possible blood disorder a person can have if they're still not quite sure from previous exams. And here are some of the references I used to make this presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope this was helpful.